You're listening to The Watchers, a podcast where two women from opposite ends of New Jersey watch TV about New Jersey. I'm Jodie.
And I'm Andrea. And this week, most of that is true.
Yes, some of it is not.
We are two women from opposite ends of
Yes.
New Jersey watching, certainly.
Yes, still true.
Yes. We are in our off season. I'm going through major Yellowjackets withdrawal. I'm sure you are as
God.
well.
It's been brutal.
It's going to be one of those shows that becomes one of my perverse comfort shows that will just be on in the background, where it's like, and it's not a show that, because like X-Files is one of those for me where I can just throw it on and it like is almost
alone as that for me.
two really just like, peaceful, lovely little shows.
Well, I used to fall asleep listening to the Rachel Maddow podcast, if that tells you anything about my brain.
It does. It tells me a lot, actually. But so I just can feel that happening already.
Yeah.
But all that to say, we're in our off season.
We've got to do something in the meantime. Yeah.
This is our first official episode back. We missed you all very much. If you are listening to this, thank you so much for wanting to hang out when we're not actively talking about Yellowjackets. Though I think we're always going to kind of be talking about Yellowjackets.
Yeah. Well, and also, like, the fact that we became so obsessed with Yellowjackets has a lot to do with our pop culture histories and the kinds of things that we like to watch. And so if you are a fan of Yellowjackets, you will probably be a fan of a lot of the same stuff that we are going to be talking about. Yeah. And, when we started this together, we were sort of excited to talk about Yellowjackets from the lens of to like millennial Gen X queer women from a certain part of the world, and that is still going to be the lens we take on all the other stuff too.
Totally.
Yeah.
And I think this first one that we told folks last week that we were going to watch is one that kind of, I think you maybe have been referencing since episode 1, maybe.
Yeah. And especially particularly in relationship to the Black comedy parts of Yellowjackets. Every time you have said this is a comedy, my brain goes to Heathers.
Yeah, and there, as I said, this is a movie that just somehow I missed. It makes no sense that I missed it. But there are
other than generationally, because it came out in '88.
Yeah, I think that's in the way that like I couldn't have watched everything that came out, but so many of my favorite movies are from this time period. When you and I we like brainstormed a list of movies, and a lot of them were ones that we both had already seen, because I am deeply like in love with and invested with this time period for movies, and also this like kind of genre. Although Heathers is its own thing, totally. I have learned this week. But so it is strange that I missed it. But now I have no longer missed it. I have caught it thanks to you.
Yes, you're welcome. I mean, I was 12 when this movie came out. Like, I was also too young for this movie, but it was such a touchstone for everyone I went to high school with. Well, like, we were full on obsessed with this movie the entire time.
I think that's me, but for Clueless, which I saw in the theaters. I was very young. Like, Mean Girls should be my high school movie, but Clueless is. Like, I think it's different to see something as like, I saw Clueless and just assumed that was the high school experience, as opposed to Mean Girls as do you know what I mean? Like, it wasn't imagined for me. I guess I wonder what it says about the two of us that your imagined high school experience you got from Heathers and I got from Clueless. Well,
and honestly, other than the murder part, like, this wasn't that far off.
Well, that's what's so interesting. I mean, we're not going to do a scene by scene breakdown like we would in this for Yellowjackets episode. Also, hopefully you watched it. We talked with you last week, so even if this is new to you for this week, hopefully you have seen it either recently or know it front to back like Jodie does. But that's one of the things that's so interesting about this movie is it is a take on those high school movies of the era. But it's so interesting to me that it's of the time and referring back to the time in which it was made. Like, we'll talk about what we're gonna watch for next week at the end of this episode, but the movie that I picked is also like a parody isn't the right word for it. I don't want to say too much yet.
Referential.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But to the previous generation, not its current generation.
Right.
Which Heather's is doing. It's so interesting.
Yeah. And so I think the reason that my friends and I reacted so strongly to this movie, because I will tell you, this feels like the movie that everyone I knew was obsessed with.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think that's true.
It's deeply weird.
Like, so what I mean by that is this made me pull out my high school yearbook, which I just told you before we started recording, which is horrifying at my age.
Well, just for some reference for folks, this movie came out in 89?
88.
88, and you graduated in
93.
93. Okay, so yeah, pretty.
Yeah. It was really significant. But what I'm realizing as I rewatch it is that it could not have been as significant to 80% of my high school as it was to me and my friends specifically.
Right.
Like, we have talked about the fact that, like, I started high school in 89 as a sort of metalhead kid from the wrong town, a couple towns away, who had moved to like the nice town. And instead of trying to fit in, I just smoked behind the cafeteria with the sort of like, what's the word? Like the deadbeat kids, even though I should have been, I don't know. I related a little too hard to Veronica in this movie.
You know what's funny that you've just made me realize is that there's always, maybe this is less so now, I don't know, but historically, the popular clique is a high school thing. We had them in my high school. It wasn't quite as divided as this, but it certainly was. But what the popular clique looks like changes, right? From the 50s, 60s, all the way up, right? Up to now. The opposite end of that spectrum has always been the kids cutting lunch to go smoke out. Like that group stays the same. What's that? What is that?
It is because it is in opposition always. It's like, so my high school was very much like this. It was very stratified. It was very clear what those strata were. It was very, you didn't move between groups as easily.
It's so interesting that We're back, folks. That I can't help but put the Jersey lens on this because you're from the we're the most populated state in the country and one of the most populated places, like densely populated places in the world, I think.
Bergen County is extremely densely populated, yeah.
And on the one hand, and so because of that, class, it really runs the gamut. And that's true for South Jersey too. We have very wealthy areas that back up right against much poorer areas. Like Camden County has Haddonfield, which is one of the richest towns in New Jersey, 2 seconds away from Camden, which is one of the poorest in the country still. So it's not to say that that's not the case, but I think in North Jersey it's even more pronounced. And so
100%.
And on the one hand, though, you would think that might allow for more shifting, but I think what it does, it just draws it into even starker relief.
Yeah. Yeah, because the high school I went to was very upper middle class. There were people, and I was not. And there were people in that high school that were coming to...
That's also a very Jersey thing that you and I both have to do. Remind people.
I have to clarify. Yeah. I was not. FYI, my dad worked in retail. My mom was on disability. I drove a Ford Tempo. Like,
absolutely. I just love how quick, like, our listeners don't clarify. None of our listeners are listening and being like, oh, these rich idiots, that we have to tell them that we're not. But it's just reflex.
But it's interesting because I went to that high school, I, in my professional life, kind of learned that language of how to appear as a part of that group of people.
Right, yeah.
And I think it actually benefited me quite a lot professionally to have that experience.
I believe that.
But so, there were kids coming to my school. We were not the richest town around us at all. We were kind of like top third in the area. But there were kids coming to school driving like, their dad's Mercedes and, being gifted really fancy cars for their 17th birthday. And then there were kids that were pretty poor, living in like, kind of shitty apartments, either not, excuse me, for some reason, because we're from New Jersey, like what car you had is like a very significant indicator.
Totally.
So there were also kids driving to school in like, station wagons with their bumpers falling off and things like that. So there was this stratification both economically but also socially.
I don't know if it's about to get really boring for our listeners. I'm so sorry, but what you
Are we going to talk about cars?
No, I mean maybe a little, but for me it's like, and in South Jersey, at least the part that I was from, up to a point, yes, but then most of the kids who could afford the fancier cars and all just went to one of the private schools. Like, you didn't, like, there was the separation was more separated in both like spatial and then also that way, as opposed to like North Jersey, where, and I'm sure kids did go to private schools up there, obviously, but we
had some Catholic schools that were sort of that magnet. But I will say that because, like, if you look up like the top public schools in like on the East Coast, like a good chunk of them are in North Jersey,
right? So it wasn't such a big issue.
Yeah, it's why everyone bitches about the taxes,
right? So
like you wanted, literally, instead of paying private school tuition, you would pay higher taxes to live in a town like Ridgewood or Glen Rock,
right, and
go to those schools. Like, you literally were paying private school tuition, but it was your property tax.
Right, exactly, yeah. And again, I just want to, Jersey is alike all over in a lot of ways up to a point, and I think this is a good example of that. Like, obviously the kids going to public school in Haddonfield were having a very different experience than the kids going to public school in Gloucester Township, where I went.
Right. And I think the thing that's, and again, this may be really boring to a lot of people, but if you grew up in New Jersey, you'll probably recognize this. Like, in towns like Ridgewood and Glen Rock, there were people whose parents could afford to live there, and then there were people who had kind of found a way to
totally
either scam the system somehow, or like my mom I just wrote something about this recently. My mom gave a fake address so we could go to the pool in Ridgewood.
Yeah. That's such a Jersey thing. Yeah. I think it's a Jersey thing.
I don't know.
I just have so many examples of that.
Yeah. And so we were some of those people that I felt like we had scammed our way in, because like whatever, not important. But anyway, but not only the economic stratification in this movie, but the social stratification was super real when I was in high school. And so like, and the bullying was like, I just want to explain for people who are like, if we have listeners that are not our age or like have grown up in the era where bullying is actually talked about and things are done about it, like the level of overt, like inter-student sort of like emotional and physical violence is really fucking accurate to what it was like to be in high school in the early 90s.
I think we're going to talk about this movie directly, and I know you just tried to shift it back, but I think now it seems that kind of bullying has moved because schools are so, or at least act as if they're very like zero tolerance when it comes to bullying on school grounds, at least, that a lot of that has moved into online spaces.
Absolutely. Yeah. I have said for a long time that if the internet had existed when I was in middle school, I probably would have killed myself, because at least with the bullying in school, I could go home and like read a book at the end of the day and pretend that none of it was real.
You just had to get through 8 hours.
Yeah, no big deal.
Yeah.
But like literally, like you could then go home and have your summers and have your like, but it's life outside of school. And now that just doesn't, like, it just bleeds into every moment of every day.
I'm like constantly online now. That wouldn't have been different for me if I were in high school now. I still would have been. And I wasn't I was a weird kid, but I wasn't a bullied kid. I think I was
right.
I don't know what my group was. I don't know if we just I don't know, but
if you don't know, you weren't in the bullied crew.
Well,
not in the hardcore anyway.
Yeah. I mean, like, I don't know what saved me from it, because I was a strange, I think I was just too,
Oh, I know exactly. No, I know exactly. Because we had you.
There was a me.
Yeah. We had a couple, actually. And it was like the weird kid that was like somehow had this like bubble of weird around them where people were like, I don't know what to do with that.
Yeah, I don't
And
know how
like,
you would, in what specific way you would have bullied me that would have
yeah,
landed. Like,
that's the thing. And I kind of like, I loved those kids. Like, they kind of just floated through with this, like, what's going on with that person vibe around them, you
I think
know?
I'm lucky for that because it wasn't intentional. I just was like, yeah, I don't know.
Yeah. And for me, it was like, look at that sensitive ball of nerves. Let's poke it.
Just watch how it reacts.
Yeah. Yeah.
God.
I relate to, you know, those sensitive plants, the leaves, where,
Uh,
like, if you touch them, they like
oh,
fold
then they,
up.
that's you.
Yeah. Well, that was me in high school. So we should probably talk about the movie
Yeah.
instead of like going through our therapy session about high school. But I literally, so I just looked at my yearbook, like I said, and I looked at what my friends wrote to me in my yearbook.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we all thought we were Veronica Sawyer.
Oh, no.
In the way that, like, thankfully, I don't know what I wrote in anyone's yearbook because I don't have access to that. But what especially my friend Nicole wrote in my yearbook was, like, very much mad Veronica Sawyer wearing a monocle scribbling about, like.
They give her a monocle. That was
monocle,
like
my favorite. I mean, weren't you a kid who wanted a pocket watch at some point? Like,
yeah.
I think I had a pocket watch at some point.
Yeah. Yes.
So,
Oh
yeah.
boy.
So Heathers is a movie about Veronica Sawyer and her three Heathers, her three friends. They are the popular clique in high school. They are very cruel, and their lives are somewhat upended when a young man named JD moves to town, played by Christian Slater.
It is a good thing that I didn't see this movie when I was a young person because I would have been in love with this horrible man.
Yeah. Oh, I was.
Boy. Yeah, of course
I
you were.
was.
How could you not be?
But now I watch it and I'm like, oh my God.
Yeah, we talked about this off mic a little bit. He's like, I think you said proto-incel. Like,
Yeah. So we talked about how this movie starts out more as like a high school satire and it accelerates very, very quickly.
Yeah, I watched this on Tubi, which means I had breaks, which means I watched the first act, if we're going to break it down that way, but it's a very short first act. And when it came back where it starts to shift, I thought maybe I missed a part of the movie or that Tubi had given me a weird edit because it goes 0 to 60 so fast in a way I really liked. It shows how aware of the genre it is, that it's kind of like, you guys get it. You know what these movies are, so we can give you the few things you need to understand this particular like planet in this universe of movies, and then we can start turning it on its head.
It like sets up the social setting, right? The high school, the popular kids. It like kind of goes through the different other groups. There's like the nerdy kids, there's the deadbeat stoners behind the cafeteria, there's like the kid that needs to get into Princeton. Like it covers all the little tropes, you know, the jocks that are like super homophobic, and then there's JD over in the corner. Like,
it's funny to trace the kind of lineage. I'm probably going to have a hard time not doing this as we move through it. But, you know, Breakfast Club obviously is the most like direct, and Breakfast Club spells these groups kind of out for us at the end of that movie. I mean, throughout the movie, but like literally spells it out for us at the end of that movie.
It. Yeah.
And then we have it here a little more subtly, though the groups are much more I don't know what the word is, but much more like heightened, more like caricatures of those groups.
Sure, yeah. And it uses the setting of the cafeteria to really lay that out.
Yeah.
Which I thought was super accurate.
Yeah, totally. And then you see that again in Clueless. A few years later, though, it's a little... The groups are not quite as... Because it's a little more evolved. Yeah. It's a little softer and a little more evolved. But then it comes back around with Mean Girls, where they literally, like, there's a voiceover where Janice Ian, who is kind of, I mean, I guess I guess Katie Harrod is our Veronica in that movie, but Janice Ian kind of really is, I think. Anyway, it doesn't matter. But she gives the voiceover. She's like, over here in this corner, we have this group and this group. And it's so talking back to these movies.
Yeah. Yeah. And everyone that was in high school when I was recognized this immediately as as accurate. You know, not as heightened, actually. The heightened part of this movie is the murders.
Right.
The rest of it could have happened.
Even the shoulder pads?
Absolutely the shoulder pads.
Even
Although
for
by the time
80s.
I was in high school, that was done.
Yeah.
Yeah.
These outfits are they're believable. I understand the 80s. But they're so, this movie is so cartoonish.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the good word for it. Yeah, you mentioned Tim Burton earlier. It feels very the clothing choices, the music, the maybe we'll talk about this a little bit later, but the camera work and all of the visual stuff.
And this weird little dream sequences or whatever they are, that's all. It feels very Beetlejuice to me, which in this movie, and even with Winona and all of
Winona
that.
Ryder.
And even Otho is in this, Glenn Shaddix, who I love. He plays he's the priest in this movie. Right. So there's a lot of almost a kind of winking back to Beetlejuice. It also just to start with the opening scene where they're all playing
croquet.
Yeah, it's also very it feels very like Alice in Wonderland in the beginning because obviously because of the croquet, but there's just the weird colors and out in this pleasant little garden, but then you see very quickly that it's not going to be that. The trampling of the flowers in that opening scene is that's when Jodie, I texted you, I said this movie is already perfect, and it's when they had just
stepped on the flowers.
Yeah.
So it starts with that scene, they're playing croquet, everything seems relatively normal, and then the ball bounces off of Veronica's head. And then we go directly to the cafeteria scene where we meet JD, and they're doing the lunchtime poll.
Which, again, extremely high school, continues to be extremely high school. You also see that, again, 20 years later, or however many years later in Mean Girls, 25 years later, where they're literally one of the, shithead boys in the school is walking around doing a poll.
Which I don't think we ever did that. I don't know. But anyway, but it's when we meet JD, and as soon as we see JD, we know who JD is in a way, because he's got, we brought up over when we were talking earlier about the trench coat, how he is the visual referent for something that actually comes much later.
Yeah, this movie, I did love it. I have complicated feelings about it, and it's not the movie's fault that I have those feelings. It's because I'm a Columbine child. That's my generation. So this stuff is not that it's ever easy to watch, but I just think that how we feel about school violence is changed so
wildly
dramatically.
Different. Yeah. It's interesting to think about this as a period piece because of when it came in our history as a country that is beset with school shootings now. This was not something that I grew up with.
Right.
I did not grow up thinking about school shootings at all. I graduated in 93.
Yeah.
We didn't have this.
The sort of after school special commentary of this movie has way more to do with, I guess we'll put a content warning in the show notes,
right?
Because this movie is rife. I mean, anything that comes up in this movie, consider a content warning for it being discussed in this episode, obviously. But the after school special kind of commentary in this is on teen suicide, not teen violence, not violence toward one another.
And I just recently listened to a podcast about the current mental health crisis among teens and current teen suicide rates. And they'd mentioned something in that podcast about how it's the highest it's been, but the previous peak was this time frame.
Right.
And so it was a big conversation.
Yeah. I think it was much more romanticized in the 80s than it is now. It's very high now. It's an epidemic. And but I don't think it's looked at, it's viewed very differently now than it.
Well, it's viewed through the lens of a much more mental health conscious society.
Yeah.
Like, when I hear my current students and college age people talking about being on antidepressants and having anxiety and all of these things, this was not discussed when I was in high school.
Yeah.
So it was like everything was fine or you committed suicide. There was no like, this person is in treatment for mental health issues. It was just completely hidden. And the only time you were aware of it was when it got to this point.
Right. Right. And I was on just the tail end of that where like I didn't know anybody in therapy when I was in high school. I knew plenty of kids who said something in class that got them taken away for an evaluation, and then they'd be gone for a couple of days and they'd come back and it would start all over. There was no in treatment for young. Absolutely not. At least that we talked about.
Right.
And I'm obviously so glad that conversation has shifted. It is heartbreaking and troubling that it is so much more out in the open and we do have more resources, but it's still such an issue, obviously.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, they talk about, we're kind of all over the place with this conversation, but it's kind of why I wanted to have this conversation, because not only that, but everybody talks about how Gen X was like this detached, ironic, like nothing matters, nobody cares, nihilistic, like generation. And that is why this movie and other ones like it spoke to us so much.
Right.
Because it took the it took that seriously. Like it recognized that there was a reason that we were sort of detaching to protect ourselves.
Right.
Like all of us had these like boomer parents that were either
the parents
like alcoholics, not present, like the whole latchkey kid generation thing. Like we were all on our own. And like this is, I mean, you and I met through the New Jersey is the World podcast, and a lot of what they and we have talked about over there is what it was like growing up specifically in New Jersey at that time, feeling like everything was lawless and nobody was watching us.
The parents in this movie, because they are, at least for Veronica's really the only one. Veronica and JD are the only one whose like home lives we really get a good look at. They're very present in this movie. They're there a lot. They're
physically.
They're not great parents, obviously. So that's a little.
Will someone please tell me why I smoke these things?
That?
Because you're an idiot, Dad.
That like practiced back and forth that they've done a million times, that these people do not actually know their child, that they're it's not even pretending, because I think they think that they're involved parents. I get the impression that they don't think they're all that checked out. And also those scenes are so funny. This Heathers is Heathers has become a musical that people really love. It in a lot of ways felt like a play to me, like these weird little like interstitials, I guess, with the parents that could be totally
and how they
separate.
And how they repeat during very disparate emotional moments. Right, like in the beginning, it's after the croquet feels very silly and like light, and then they repeat that same interaction right before she's going to Heather's funeral.
But it does, and in that way they're so detached, right? Because they're so light about what she's going through, even though they do know to an extent what she's going through. But they're just so like insulated from it, I guess. Which is that is also a very like a kind of heightened version of what happens in childhood. Like my family didn't know what I wasn't up to, what Veronica and co are up to, but like they didn't know. Like childhood is very secret, like especially your teenage years. I think even if you are someone who has like good functional parents who you're close with, like I think like it just is a kind of I keep wanting to say secret, but kind of like secret thing.
And I wonder if that's as true now. Like I've watched my cousins raising their teenagers, and I'm sure their teenagers have all these inner lives that they don't know about, but in a real physical sense, they know what their children are doing,
right?
Much more than my parents did.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, I didn't have a cell phone that there could have been like a GPS on it or
Nope.
whatever. Like, yeah,
Nope.
that's a good point. That's interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know.
There's I was trying to find the exact quote of the great pate, but I've got a motor if I'm going to get to this funeral on time.
I think that might be it.
It's close. It's not quite it, but
So much language that I use. I say motor now. I'm 37 years old. I've never seen this movie, but like I say that.
Well, because this movie invented a slang. Like, people who look back at this now, who hadn't seen it at the time, may think this is just how people talked back then, but it's not. It's how they talked after this movie. None of these sayings were things that we said until we saw this movie.
I think that's the case for Clueless, too.
I think you might be right about that.
Now that I think about it, we look at that movie as a kind of like, I think it kind of created that generation of especially girls, but like of teenage girls. I don't think it was reflecting them so much as it did create them in an interesting way, to an extent anyway.
Yeah. Yeah, no, the language in this basically just turned into a language afterwards.
So fascinating. Except for I didn't do the research that you would normally do in my seat, I think, for a movie like this. But I did read the Entertainment Weekly Oral History, which was pretty good. I'll drop a link, and a couple other little like listicles just to get a little more of the conversation around it. And one of the things I read from the director Michael Lehmann is that he had a friend who would say, "Fuck me gently with a crowbar." And he said in the oral history that felt too he really loved it, but it felt too masculine to him. And so he changed it to chainsaw. And I can't figure out why chainsaw is more. I had a teacher in undergrad who, shout out Dr. Meadowsong, she's the best, who said, just keep in mind that anything longer than it is wide is a phallic symbol. And that means
also a chainsaw.
Also a chainsaw. I don't. Yeah. I'm trying so hard to figure out what is more feminine
about a chainsaw.
Yeah.
Nothing.
Like
nothing. So we started with the croquet match. We go to the cafeteria. We see the lunchtime poll. We meet JD, and then the end of that little section is Kurt and Ram. Perfect names, no notes. Oh, yeah. Go over to have fun bullying JD for a moment. He pulls out a gun and shoots them with blanks. Which is like the moment you realize this movie is going to go from being a high school satire to something a bit more over the top and out there.
Yeah.
Because you kind of expect, even I've seen this movie a million times. I even kind of forgot the shocking feeling of that moment where instead of him like threatening to fight them or like
having
walking
some
away,
like verbal parry.
Yeah. Yeah. Instead he pulls out a fucking like, I don't know what kind of gun that is. I'm not a gun person, but it's not a small handgun.
No, it's again cartoonish.
But he shoots them with blanks, they pee themselves. It's like written off as a joke. And then the next big scene is the frat party. And so maybe this is where we should talk about the sort of sexual politics of the time and the assaulty nature of a lot of this movie. That I feel like if they, I'm going to say this a lot, if they made this movie today, there would be so much more seriousness and recrimination around the behavior of the men towards the women in this movie.
Yeah, absolutely.
Instead, it's really just like, this is how it is. You go to a frat party, someone like coerces you into giving them a blowjob, and then you puke on your friend's shoes, and like, it's not wrong.
Right, yeah. And that gives you like the reason that Heather has the kind of social currency she does is because she goes along with it. Like, not goes along with isn't the right, because it, you know, but but it's not, the like thing here isn't Heather dealing with this, what I mean is, it's, sorry, I think you said coercion, right? That's it's at the very least she's coerced into
it's not a sexual assault,
right?
But it's, wow, I'm gonna get real specific now.
It is not enthusiastic consent, I'll say that.
No,
at the very
it's not
least.
And like, okay, not to get political, but what the fuck,
not to get political, two queer women from Jersey, okay, sure.
Not to get political.
That's literally in our tagline.
I know. So I'm making a weird connection here that makes sense to me. It may not make sense to you. When the Brett Kavanaugh hearings were happening, and Christine Blasey Ford was talking about her experience with these rich prep school asshole kids in high school and being assaulted by them, and the general culture around young men and young women and sex and entitlement and all of that stuff in that time period. It was so normal. And the fact that we're looking at it differently now is still something that, like, is hard for me to wrap my brain around. Like, it's good, but it's literally, that was so fucking normal.
Yeah.
Like, that was not shocking to me at all when I watched it the first time.
Right, yeah. And the thing, this isn't to excuse high school and college boys behaving that way. Please know that.
No.
I don't think
when I say it was normal, I don't mean that that's a good thing.
Right, but I don't think it would have occurred to them to label what they were doing as certainly not assault, but not even as being as coercive or as like, it's just like we set up a sort of like cultural conversation where women had to be, because for a million reasons women aren't whatever supposed to enjoy sex at all, that any encounter had to be a sort of like best case scenario convincing, you know what I mean? Like, and that's like, which
is why it's a little bit heartbreaking to me when I rewatched this, that the relationship between Veronica and JD starts out with enthusiastic like consent their
relationship is not, and in a way that I was troubled by, obviously, but like their relationship is not what doesn't end up being what I had expected. I thought this was a movie I thought this was like natural born killers in high school.
Yeah.
That like Veronica and JD would
like
be
Bonnie and Clyde.
Which is what he thinks at first.
Yeah.
And she even says, I think she makes that reference, right?
She does, yeah.
And so I kind of I like Veronica is a character I'm still not sure how I feel about. There's no real hero in this movie.
No.
It's also when we first meet her and she's getting hit in the head with the croquet ball and all, it's interesting that she's part of the clique. She's one degree removed from being in her, but she's
by name.
But that's kind of it. Like, it's her first time at a Remington party. She's really working her way up, but in a way where she wants to be.
Yeah.
And is it, again, looking back to Mean Girls, Katie becomes part of that clique to sort of infiltrate them. She is not a fan of the Mean Girls when she starts hanging out with them, and then is kind of like sort of like brainwashed in a way, and like becomes obsessed with them and wants to be accepted by them, but it's a reluctant kind of desire, as opposed to Veronica. It's so interesting that she's so bought in at first. Like,
she isn't. It's so interesting so I think a underrated moment in the movie, or underemphasized moment, is when she's talking to JD about how she was like, they were going to skip her a couple of grades because she was so smart, and they decided not to do that so she could focus on her social development. And it's almost like she focused on her social development as a science experiment of like, I am going to become one of these people, and I'm going to figure out how to do that. And she did.
Totally, yeah.
And then she got there and was like, these people suck. But like, she calls them coworkers at one point when they're at the quick check. No, it's not a quick check in this movie.
It's called like Happy Snacky or something. It's got a really dumb name, but it's a quick check.
Yeah, it's a Wawa.
It's not a Wawa. Nice try.
Wawa.
Nice try, North Jersey.
It's like a 7-Eleven, basically, is what it is. But yeah. Sorry, I got off on a tangent. I don't
She's
know where
so
I am.
confident in this movie. She's not, because there are those movies that are about the popular girls, and then the She's All That movie.
Yep, this is not that.
No, I thought it would be.
Yeah,
that's what I was expecting. But she's like flirting with JD and like from
confidently.
Yeah,
and those movies, I think there's something about the fact that she's a brunette in this movie.
Yes,
that is like the indicator of like, you think this is this, but it's not. It's actually this, because she's a brunette, because like, I read something about how Shannon Doherty, they tried
Yeah.
to get her to dye her hair blonde, so that would be 3 blonde Heathers, and she was like, no.
And so they went with
made her a redhead.
just so there's still some degree of separation between. Yeah, Shannon Doherty kind of messes up a lot of what they're trying to do with this movie. I think she's so just like a couple of degrees off from the other two.
But I think that's a purposeful, because then when she becomes, like, once Heather McNamara dies and she puts on the red scrunchie,
Yeah.
it's like she's going from slightly off to, like, stepping into this place. There's the scene of her eating the chicken in the locker room
Oh, yeah.
after Heather McNamara dies, where she's like, fuck it, and she, like, throws the chicken wing.
The, like, weird bulimia joke in this movie that is kind of throwaway. Like, it's so... That's another thing, too, with Veronica. She's so in with them that she's helping Heather with her... helping her with her bulimia. And, like... But it also shows she's such a, like... She really is... I'm contradicting myself here, because she's part of their circle, but... in a lot of ways, it has to do with her utility, because they use her to write the note to what's that, Martha
Dunstock,
because she can copy people's handwriting, which is a huge plot device in this movie, and even just like the kind of like visual joke of her like hitting her in the head in the beginning kind of like points to that. But even like her helping Heather, what's that Heather's last name?
Which one? Heather Duke, Heather McNamara, or Heather...
the bulimic one.
Oh, fuck.
Shannon Doherty. Her help...
That's Heather Duke.
Okay, so helping Heather Duke throw up. You know what I mean? Like, it is... Yeah. Which I think she knows. Like, she knows that being useful is what has helped get her into this group of people.
Yeah. Yeah. So... in this first chunk, we're talking about the, I feel like in my brain, I break this movie up into pre-murder, post-murder, and then also the third part being like full-on chaos, like blowing up the school. So in the pre-murder part, the other thing that happens is at that party, Heather and Veronica have their confrontation, and Heather threatens to like ruin Veronica, and this is what sets off the chain of events that leads to her death. Yeah,
and there's that speech that you gave in an episode of Yellowjackets a little while back, that monologue, which feels like that if like when I heard you give that speech, that should have been third act.
Yeah,
that's the speech. That's like you
were playing Barbies with Betty Finn.
That's the scene in Mean Girls, like, to keep going back. It's Regina George, like, going into the burn book and kind of, like, getting ready to blow everything up. That's what I thought that speech was. I assumed that speech happened, like, in front of everybody else in high school at the end, and that's what, like, convinces Veronica and JD to then go on a killing spree, is what I thought, which it kind of does, but much, much earlier.
Well, it's what kicks off the killing spree.
Yeah.
Yeah. You were nothing before you met me. You were playing Barbies with Betty Finn. You were a bluebird. You were a brownie. You were a Girl Scout cookie. I love it. Like, it's so good.
It's setting up so much context for the rest of the movie, as opposed to wrapping up the whole, it's interesting. Yeah. Pacing of this movie is truly wild.
Yeah, because it goes from that to the next day, her and JD going over to Heather's house, and Veronica thinks she's just going to go make her throw up, because that's what Veronica did. She threw up on her shoes.
Right.
But JD has other ideas.
He is so ready to murder. Like, he doesn't even know these people.
Like, no, he's just got there.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. So instead of drinking the milk and orange juice that Veronica has prepared to make her throw up, she ends up drinking the Drano substitute, liquid drainer, they call it, which then obviously kills her, and she dramatically falls into a glass table.
It's really good. It's a very little like a pratfall of it, like
it's a legendary death scene.
It's pretty good.
when she yells or squeaks the words corn nuts.
Something else that you
brought up in relation to Yellowjackets. Yeah.
It is an interesting choice that it's corn nuts they're talking about, because it's not like in Yellowjackets. I mean, it's so specific.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's a reference to the night before when Veronica goes into it's a quick check in my head, goes into the quick check, and Heather's like, don't forget the corn nuts. So, yeah.
Even if it's not intentional, it's of the time, certainly.
Yeah. Which then sets off this murder spree, basically.
Yeah. That they decide, this first one, JD has the bright idea to play it off as a suicide because he sees she's got the bell jar Cliff's Notes.
Yes. Yeah. So, but of course what happens is that they end up lionizing Heather as this sensitive girl that, couldn't express herself in life. So she does it in death.
Mm-hmm. So funny that he's, his name is JD, like the JD Salinger of it
James
all.
Dean.
These kind of literary. And I read, who's is it her copy of Moby Dick, or is it the next Heather who dies? I'll wait to bring this up.
Heather Duke has the copy of Moby Dick.
But she's carrying around somebody else's copy, right? Or no?
No, I think it's hers.
Okay.
So, so Heather McNamara dies first. Then Veronica goes on a double date with Heather Chandler.
Right. Okay, I had my Heathers.
I might be mixing the two last names, but hold on. I have to get this part right.
We should pull it up.
Yeah. Because I know Heather Duke is Shannon Doherty. Heather... Where are we? Lisanne Falk is Heather McNamara. So I am mixing them up. Heather Chandler is the main first death. Heather Chandler is the queen bee, so to speak. Heather McNamara is the one who's dating either Kurt or Ram. They're the same person.
Yeah, it doesn't matter.
To me. And so Veronica goes on a double date with them. One of them, Kurt or Ram, ends up lying about the encounter. And then that's when JD sets up the murder-suicide between the two of them. Mm-hmm. As it's referred to in the movie, the repressed homosexual suicide pact.
I know this is deeply homophobic. I know that it is. It is because they set it up and it's unquestioned because they bring this bag of props to label them homosexuals.
Mm-hmm. Mineral water. Yeah.
What else is in? What's the? Oh God.
Oh yeah. So here it is. Candy dish. It starts with an issue of Stud Puppy.
Obviously.
Candy dish. Joan Crawford postcard. Mascara. And mineral water. And Veronica says, "Oh, come on! A lot of people drink mineral water. It's come a long way." And JD says, "Yes, but this is Ohio. I mean, if you don't have a brewski in your hand, you might as well be wearing a dress." This is a good moment to talk about the gay politics of this period.
Because, and also of this period, but I just remember, there are so many layers here because it's fucked up that they know that it will be, that the two of them being gay is a good, quote unquote, good enough reason to justify them killing themselves.
Oh yeah, it's like the worst possible thing if it came out that the two of them were gay.
Right.
Absolutely.
But the fact that everyone is so ready to accept that based on these which the movie knows that those choices, what's in those bags, are deeply stereotypical and stupid, and that the people who fall for it are idiots for that. So it is aware of that. This is still horribly homophobic, but but in a way that is a little more complex and a little more thoughtful than the joke just being, because the issue would be,
it's self-aware.
Yeah, because they're not gay, right? So like that does make it, weirdly makes it a little better. Do you know what I mean?
You know what it is? It's like because they're so homophobic themselves, it's like the whole thing where, is it like Mitch McConnell or someone, whatever politician it is, Lindsey Graham maybe, there's somebody who's like a super homophobic politician and everybody's like, oh, he's secretly gay. I think it's Lindsey Graham. And it's like, that's not the sort of jab you think it is.
Yeah. It's
like,
it is,
because that's like saying that being gay is like a bad thing that you would want to cover up with homophobia or suicide or whatever.
And not to say that there aren't closeted people who are horrific about gay people for that reason, but I always the way my hackles go up whenever anybody tries to turn homophobia in on, like, to blame homophobia on actual queer people. Like, you don't get to fucking do that.
Yeah. And that's kind of where that connection is for me. It's like, oh, of course they're secretly gay because they're always like making jokes about gay people.
Right.
And it's like, no, they're fucking homophobic jock assholes.
Right. And you're all idiots who have no like thoughtful understanding of queer people to be able to recognize these stereotypes as so stupid.
Yet I am also the person that yesterday when I went to a Pride event wearing just my normal clothes joked that my Pride flag was the tent and first aid kit in my car.
Some stereotypes, but we're allowed to say that. You know what I mean?
I'm allowed to joke about the fact that my hiking boots are my flannel are my queer flag.
Exactly. That's fine. These people don't.
Right.
And again, it's so funny how many seeds are planted for these later movies. Because a movie we haven't talked about that I love so much. When we talk about high school movies, I can't believe this one hasn't come up, but it's Can't Hardly Wait. A movie I love so much. And one of the big jokes in that movie is setting up Mike Dexter and another guy in a compromising position and taking photos. And that's late 90s. Like, the joke, it persists. It gets a little more nuanced, certainly, but like, even when I was in high school, we've talked about this. So it's not,
there was nobody openly gay in my class. None. And if you were suspected of it, it was very, very bad for you.
And we had a very small handful of people, and most of them identified, at least outwardly, who were as bisexual, which was, seen as a little better, at least for the women. Anyway, we could get into, we can and have and will continue to get into all of that, I'm sure, over and over again. So
that's sort of the escalation that keeps happening, right? It's like, this is a high school movie. Oh, wait, he's got a gun. Oh, wait, they killed someone. Oh, now they're planning a double murder. Like, it just keeps escalating and escalating and escalating. And then suddenly it starts happening super fast. Like and sloppily. Like the Heather Duke one. It's like, he just wrote like life sucks on the note.
Yeah, because again, the whole thing of it is, even from the first murder, Veronica, at least outwardly, it is hard to imagine that she doesn't actually know what's going on, but they set it up as if she's a sort of like halfway unwitting accomplice, right? She doesn't know that that the first Heather is drinking Drano. She thinks that the bullets are blanks, and even after the one kid gets shot, she
shoots the second one.
But she doesn't, but she still apparently thinks that these are blanks. Like, the whole time she's kind of which is, I guess it's a more interesting or complicated view, but it's one that I was a little disappointed by, like, that she's never 100% in and then wants to back out, but he kind of like,
well, he keeps pulling her back in, and I think it's like, it's unsatisfying because it's like, you want her to be better. You want her to not be seduced by him this long into doing this many horrible things. She does eventually turn against him, but it takes longer than we want it to.
Right. I either want her to be all in or a little more, not independent. What's the word that I want?
Like resistant to him.
Yeah. She's pretty passive through most I mean, really all of this movie, because even we'll get to it, but like she really just kind of floats along in this movie being pulled in different directions the whole time.
Until she fakes her death.
Yeah, but even that, she does fake her death, but then what comes after that?
Well, she stops him from blowing up the school.
But doesn't he...
She shoots his finger off.
She shoots his finger off, but isn't it... But doesn't the bomb get defused because of his pocket? Like...
No, she stops him from blowing up the school.
Okay.
I mean, like, it may technically be, like, when she shoots him, he, like, stabs the...
Yeah.
The bomb. But, no, I think the end is supposed to be her hero turn, where she, like, goes to the school, finds him, stops him from killing everyone. But it takes longer than I think we would like it to for her to get to that point.
Yeah, maybe that's what is... I think this movie is just a little more complicated than I was anticipating.
Yeah, technically what happens is she shoots him in the boiler room. His switchblade cuts the wires to the detonator. I mean, this is all like a little like, okay. And then she goes outside. He comes out with the bomb strapped to his chest, and he kills himself. And she lights her cigarette off the explosion.
Right. That's right.
The amount of smoking in this movie.
Yeah.
It's so late 80s, early 90s. Like, I started smoking I was 15. So whatever year that was.
Have we talked about how on this podcast how I didn't start smoking until I was 19 years old?
I think you've told me this. I don't know if we've talked about it on the podcast.
Yeah. I didn't smoke for a very long time. Yeah. I quit a few years later, but I was out of high school. There's no excuse to start smoking for any reason but peer pressure.
Yeah. No, I was 15 and I quit when I was like 21.
Yeah, that's correct. It's so funny to encounter people who still smoke. No offense, listeners. Like, you're on your journey if you're a smoker. I understand addiction. It's very addictive and it's hard. But like, I so seldom run into smokers anymore that whenever I do, I'm like, oh yeah, you can still do that.
It's really hard though.
Yeah.
Like, society has made it very difficult to be a smoker now. Cost-wise and also just like accessibility to places you can smoke. Like we literally smoked in the bathroom in high school. So like that was a thing. That's not a trope. That's a thing we actually did.
Yeah. I wonder if I don't know for sure because I do remember why I quit smoking. It's because I started taking Wellbutrin for different reasons, and Wellbutrin is great to help people stop smoking. And I just suddenly didn't want to be a smoker anymore. It was very easy for me. I'm very lucky. But it also times pretty well, I think, with when you stop being able to smoke in diners. Because that's when I was... Yeah. That's, to be perfectly, like, when I started smoking was when I graduated high school and I spent a ton of time in diners in high school, too. But, like, I spent so much time in the, like, couple of years post-high school hanging out in diners with my just graduated friends, chain smoking and drinking coffee.
Yeah. Yeah, as you do.
Exactly.
So some other things. I mean, I feel like we didn't really do a recap of the plot, but I don't know that we actually need to. I mean, that is the plot. Yeah. Like, there's some things that so we talked about the sort of culture of like sexual assault and harassment of the time. We talked about the homophobia. I have some really dumb notes.
Please share.
One of them was people had real teeth in the 80s.
Yeah, I noticed that too.
The actors in this movie have normal human teeth. They haven't had a full set of veneers and like all the like work done that you have to be an actor today. I'd forgotten about that.
I wonder if that's why, because I started to text you a joke about how everybody in this movie is 30.
They also look 30. It's not just the teeth.
But they're not. Most of them, I think the oldest one, I was looking at their ages, is Heather Prime. And she's only like 23, which for a high school movie isn't really... Like, when you look at 90210, how much older are these? But I think I didn't realize Winona is just off of Beetlejuice. She was only, 16 when this movie... I think
she was like, 17 maybe?
When they were shooting this movie.
They look a lot older.
Yeah. But I think part of it is that, like, they just look like what we expect people in real life to look like.
Yeah. I will say the high school supposedly high school aged male characters in this movie. And like the college guys at the party, they look 35.
Truly, truly.
Like it makes it that much more disgusting that they're like, and also realistic in some ways that they're hitting on these high school girls.
Yeah. But even Christian Slater, I think, is only 18.
Yeah.
Which is
yeah.
interesting that, again, they all look. I know part of that is they're wearing the businesswoman special, all of them. And
yeah.
But yeah. He has perfect hair in this movie. And insane eyebrows. And I know everybody's talked about it and has been talking about it forever. But just the fact that he's doing young Jack Nicholson is so funny. It's such a funny choice.
He's doing that in this movie and in Pump Up the Volume, which is the other Christian Slater movie at this time that cemented him as the heartthrob for all slightly alternative girls of the time.
Well, and I think, it's because it's barely, I think he's obviously got some like natural Jack Nicholson vibes to begin with, and he's just kind of getting into it.
Another note that I have is, wow, cow tipping had a hold on the culture.
Yeah.
Like, did you know people that actually cow tipped?
No, the only other thing I know about cow tipping is it's in Tommy Boy. I can't believe you've never been cow tipping before.
It's in a lot of movies from this time period. I guess people did it. I don't know.
Well, no, because I don't think cows actually sleep standing up. I think that's a myth.
Really?
Oh, this is our South-North Jersey divide, but I am almost positive.
We did not have cows in my neighborhood.
They can doze off on their feet, but they sleep lying down.
Okay.
And so I grew up around a lot of... I spent a few years in parts of New Jersey where there were a lot of cows. And cows sleep lying down.
It's got to be real. It was in like every movie in the 80s and 90s.
It's not a real thing. They don't sleep standing up. Also, do you know... Hold on. I started to look it up. Do you know how heavy a cow is?
Yeah.
Do you know how many people... How strong you would have to be to tip a cow over?
It seems doable.
Hold on. No.
It seems possible.
A group of strangers walking up on them, this farmer says alive. I don't think that's going to be possible. He's never heard of cow tipping occurring in his own fields. This is a Smithsonian Magazine article. It would take 5 people to muster the force required to push a cow over, assuming that the cow was standing completely still, which they would only be doing if they were sleeping, which they don't do standing up.
Or 2 football players who've had a lot to drink.
This is so North Jersey. Never been near a cow of you.
I've been near cows, just not a lot.
That's just not a lot. The cow would just run forward. Like
I do when I drive by cows, I always have to say cow.
You gotta say cows. Oh, you gotta say cows.
Yeah.
You can't not.
That's my expertise. Okay. Debunked. Cow tipping.
Debunked.
Yeah. Another fun thing that I noticed is in Heather Chandler's locker after she died, they open it and there's a Barbara Kruger postcard that I shop there 4 a.m. Which is like, Barbara Kruger is not saying that as that's a good thing.
That is really...
For those who aren't art nerds, Barbara Kruger, famous feminist text and image artist.
I was going to say you would recognize the images if not...
Oh, yeah.
If not the name, for sure.
The style of type and yeah. But the I shop there 4 a.m. taken very seriously by Heather Chandler as opposed to the initial intention of the piece.
So funny.
Oh, I mean, we have to reference the classic quote from this movie that I repeated for years afterwards. I love my dead gay son. That and fuck me gently with a chainsaw became very much part of our lexicon.
Also, I know Dear Diary, my teen angst bullshit has a body count. Is like
it's a good one.
Yeah, and there's a oh god, From First to Last, which was the Sonny who was Skrillex. People might know him better as his band before he was Skrillex. They're one of their first. I actually don't know how many albums they had. Doesn't matter. But one of their albums is called Dear Diary, my teen angst has a body count. That's what I knew that from first.
So the other thing I think that was very specific in this movie, but also in a lot of other movies of the time, was we talked a little bit about the cluelessness of the adults, but specifically the cluelessness of the adults teachers.
Yeah.
The hippie school counselor that like puts on the
Loving.
Yeah, for the cameras, essentially. The hypocrisy of adults is like very present in this movie, Pump Up the Volume. For some reason, Ferris Bueller's Day Off came to me thinking about this too. Just like the adults being clueless and hypocritical and slightly evil, but like in a sort of unintentional way.
Because they're just so unaware of like
Right.
the lives of these students. Yeah. And how quickly they turn this into like positive PR for the high school.
Oh,
is
yeah.
so gross. The teachers just to keep doing this because I think the lineage is important, especially because if we're thinking about it in terms of Yellowjackets, it's pointing back to all of this. Is the teachers in Clueless there are only two who we really get to know well, and it's Miss Geist and hold on, I have IMDb up. Mr. Hall, who played Wallace Shawn, I love him so much, who are like really sweet and the kids genuinely like and are kind of like regular actual characters in the movie. But then when we get to Mean Girls, every teacher is either a stereotype. Like we have the health teacher who is really inappropriate and uninformed about the classes he's teaching and all of that, or actual characters like Tina Fey, who has like an arc in the movie. So they become, on the one hand, like even bigger caricatures, but on the other, they kind of allow space for real characters to emerge in that role, which is not the case at this point.
No. And I mean, later we get things like Dead Poets Society. I don't know what year that came out. Actually, that might have not have been too much later. But where
our manic
teacher,
pixie dream professor?
Yeah. Where the teacher relationship is like romanticized to an insane amount.
89.
Oh my God. Next year.
Interesting.
Oh my God. Robert Sean Leonard grew up in the next town over from me.
What?
Yeah, he grew up in Ridgewood.
He's a Jersey guy?
He's a Jersey guy. He grew up in Ridgewood, New Jersey.
And then House is set in Jersey.
Yeah. I literally, I saw him a couple of years ago. He lives in Jersey still, or moved back or whatever. I saw him waiting for a New Jersey Transit train in Secaucus.
Stars, they're just like us.
I know. Yeah, no, it was a big deal that he was from New Jersey because we had a huge crush on him.
Yeah, yes, we did collectively.
Yes, and like there was like the one time I think I saw him in Ridgewood, like I don't know, there was something. Was it in Blimpies? It was near Blimpies. I don't think he was in Blimpies. But yeah, Robert Sean Leonard is a Ridgewood guy.
Oh my God, I love that.
Yeah,
House is a Jersey show. What if we made our poor listeners watch every season of House? A show
27 seasons of House.
A show that I love so much.
It's a great show.
I understand that it's a problem. I understand that we shouldn't, again, romanticize somebody like Dr. House, who is a bad person.
Yes.
And he is horrific to Robert Sean Leonard in that show. And also they are in love, and I love them both so much.
It's a classic.
Oh,
yeah, that would be brutal though to do that every week.
Don't worry, listeners, we won't do that to you. But boy, do I want to now.
I know. I've thought about that before, actually.
Of doing a House series podcast.
When we were looking at other Jersey things to talk about, I like looked up a list of like film and TV set in New Jersey, and House obviously is on that list. And I was like, wow, that would be a whole thing.
God, every week, just the formula of this show, just making people.
Oh my God.
I guess I'm gonna have to rewatch House again for the millionth time. That's fine.
Early choices for Veronica that didn't end up being the final choice were Justine Bateman and Jennifer Connelly.
Jennifer Connelly, I could see off of like.
She's too nice though.
I mean, maybe it's because, but it's like in retrospect, but like, yeah, Winona Ryder's so good for this.
Brad Pitt read for the role of JD. I know, right? Apparently, Christian Slater reports, this is just Wikipedia, but Christian Slater reports throwing a big tantrum and tossing his script in the trash after assuming he'd bombed his audition.
It's the oral history that I read. He and Shannon Doherty seem like such brats. Like,
like she wouldn't dye her hair for the part. She was like,
yeah.
Oh, yeah. He called her a bit of a handful on the set because she objected to some of the swearing in the script.
Funny.
That's so funny. Yeah, one of the, was the director? One of the people running the film said that he said, I don't think Shannon really got what Heather's was, and that worked for us. She
Oh.
made that character real.
Yeah.
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 Okay, so I have a question for you.
Yes.
Just because to kind of like pull this back around. How would this film be different if it took place in New Jersey?
Oh.
And how would it be the same? Because I think that Ohio and New Jersey are very similar in soul and spirit.
Yeah.
Do you have an answer?
Yeah. Well, I will say the one thing is, do they go to the mall in this movie at all?
They do not.
That's number one.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Number one.
Absolutely.
There would be scenes at the mall.
Yes.
It's surprising for the 80s that there aren't any.
Yeah. I mean, because even Ohio was big mall country too.
Yeah. But I guess it just wasn't. Again, it may be a little too early for anywhere for the rest of for it to have needed to be a touchstone for the rest of the country. Once you get to Clueless, they have to go to the mall. Like,
right. Also, it might have been a production cost thing. This was not a high budget movie.
Yeah, also true. But they go to the mall in Yellowjackets. They go to a very scary mall.
Yeah, they do. Yeah, there would have been a social scene of some kind in the mall.
Yeah. Two little things that stuck out to me, speaking of malls, but it's just what I was reminded of. Their high school is Westerberg High, which I don't know if it's a direct replacements reference, but it feels like
it must.
Westerberg. Yeah, it must be. And then
Yeah.
also, it's set in, what's the name of this town? Is it Sherwood?
It is set in, yes, Sherwood, Ohio.
Which is that a real place?
I don't know.
But it feels like a little bit of a wink to Shermer, Illinois, the fictional town where all of the John Hughes movies are set.
Oh, totally. Totally. Sherwood is a village in Defiance County, Ohio.
Oh, okay.
The population was 802 people during the 2020 census.
Interesting.
Yikes.
But then at least in name, I feel like it must be.
Yeah. I feel like if this took place in New Jersey, I feel like there would be more violence from the teachers.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, it wouldn't just be that they were like kind of bad people that were like, shaming kids for being, teenagers, but there would be like some sort of corporal punishment involved.
Yeah, that was definitely still a thing, right?
Yeah. Maybe if it took place at a Catholic high school, for sure. The original version in the script, before it got to its final cut, JD does blow up.
Oh, I read this. Yeah, tell folks
Westerberg.
what.
Yeah, so in the
ending would
original
have
version of the
been.
script, it had a much darker ending. JD does blow up Westerberg, and the final scene is a sort of heaven prom, where like they're all up in heaven because they all died.
I kind of love that. I feel like that is a little more in keeping with the like tone of the overall movie.
Well, he does say in the movie the only place that groups of people like this can get along are in heaven. So
That's funny. That's like a reference, like kind of like foreshadowing the ending that doesn't actually come.
that doesn't happen. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But I mean, unfortunately, so much of the school violence thing has become reality, and we can't like joke about it like this.
Yeah,
in our films today,
there's just no way. There's just no way. Like
no. Well, the trench coat you mentioned, right? Like that became an icon after Columbine, but like it was before that an icon of a certain type of alternative dude.
Yeah, this wasn't
Like,
the trench coat for him isn't what signals him being a violent asshole. The
No, it's
trench
the
coat,
gun.
Yeah, exactly. The trench coat signals him being a like kind of like dark kind of outsider.
Yes. I had lots of crushes in high school on men wearing trench coats. Like it was a thing. And it was not the thing it is now.
No, I mean, they're fully, I don't know if they still are. I'm sure that they are. But like Columbine happened when I was in middle school and trench coats were fully banned. Like,
Which is wild to me.
yeah, there's no way you could wear that.
Like when I was in high school, that's how you knew that a guy was like into reading. And like maybe had like a sketchbook.
That's so funny. Yeah. No.
And listened to like The Cure.
And now, if you see somebody in a trench coat, that is an intentional, a black trench coat, especially, I don't even know if you do anymore, but like outside of school, that was a real signal that that person wanted you, like what was courting that association.
Yeah. Yeah. Now it's khaki pants. Then you know they're a psycho.
Yeah, right.
Oh, also, he calls the bullets Ich lüge bullets, which translates to I'm lying in German.
Oh boy, is that high school boy thinking he's clever.
Yeah. The music in this movie isn't, other than the repeat of Que Sera Sera, it's not.
This movie feels to me like it should have a Tim Burton-esque soundtrack. That's what I think is.
Well, there is also Teenage Suicide, Don't Do It.
Oh my God.
By Big Fun.
So funny.
Yeah. And the Big Fun t-shirts that look like the Wham t-shirts.
Yeah. It's so funny how aware of the genre and the time period this movie is for being in it. Usually you need to be a little more removed. I know I was talking about this at the beginning, but.
Yeah. Maybe we should transition, that's the word, into talking about our next movie and how it relates to this.
Yeah, hell yeah.
Okay.
So it's my
So why
turn.
don't you take this one? Because it's your turn. So I think we've explained this by now, but the way that we're doing this is each of us is picking a movie each week.
That the other one
and going back and forth.
Yeah, that the other one hasn't seen and that in some way feels
spiritually connected
at least to Yellowjackets, and also that feels foundational to like what made us into the kind of people who would be obsessed enough with a show like Yellowjackets to want to talk about it every week on a podcast for a couple hours.
It's like our pop culture DNA as to like queer women from this time period.
Yeah. And so I think my hope anyway is that our listeners, these will either be movies, shows, whatever, that you also connect with or that you haven't seen, and now this will give you a reason to.
Yeah, because that's what it's doing, I think, for us. Like the ones that you picked that I haven't seen are definitely big pop culture blind spots for me. Things that I'm shocked I haven't seen.
Yeah, I'm so glad that I watched Heathers, and I wouldn't have. It's not something I don't know why, but for whatever reason that I just didn't seek out. So the movie that I picked for this week coming, what it has in common with Heathers, I'll say, is an awareness of the genre. It's a movie that is deeply invested and aware of the movies that came before it. We'll talk next week in our review, or at least I will, because I won't be able to help myself, about the context of this movie's making and its release and all of that. But I'll wait to give everybody a chance to watch it. I
feel like everyone has seen this movie but me.
I was going to say, if you haven't seen this movie, I'm so excited for you to fill this in, because it's one
If you haven't seen this movie, we should be best friends, because I think we're the only people.
It's so wonderful, and it's also one that's still in the cultural conversation because there have been a million sequels up through this year, actually.
And it's in conversation fully with Yellowjackets.
Oh, absolutely.
And including cast-wise.
Yeah, for sure. And so we'll talk about all of that next week after everybody goes off on their own and watches Scream. 1996's Scream, one of my favorite movies of all time.
I've seen none of them. None of them. I mean, we've talked about the fact that I'm not a horror movie person. Like, I was a big reader of horror when I was a kid. I read a lot of Stephen King, like most of Stephen King up until I, graduated high school, maybe, whatever was out. But I never really got into the movies themselves. I don't have a good tolerance for gore.
So for you and any other listeners who need this, it's especially now compared to what has come out. This is like torture porn horror.
I can't deal with any of that.
No, this is a slasher movie. It is a very fun slasher movie. There's plenty of blood, but this isn't a particularly gory movie.
Yeah, like if you had asked me to watch Saw,
which I would never do.
I would have been like, maybe not.
Yeah. I was just going to say there is one particularly gory scene, but it is quick and it's early on and you'll be fine.
Yeah, I mean, I watched Shauna like attack Jeff with knife hands.
Exactly. Yeah, you'll be fine. I think listeners, you will also be fine. there's not a whole lot to set up for this movie. And I do think what's going to end up happening is this isn't one, I think most of our listeners will have seen it. I think what I'm hoping will be interesting is the conversation we have about this movie, and Yellowjackets and all the other conversations we've been setting up. Also, just selfishly, I love this movie so much, and I just am excited to have a reason to talk about it.
Yeah, that's how I felt about Heathers.
Yeah, so I'm excited to get to talk about Scream. It's
Me too.
Such a good movie. I can't wait.
I'm excited to kind of like fill that hole in my pop culture knowledge, because I feel like so much of the stuff that I love has been influenced by it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that that's also sort of a side quest for us here, is like for each of us to kind of help each other with those little blind spots and be like, hey, this thing is something that you should know about if you're interested in this kind of television or movies.
Yeah, totally. And just for folks, it looks like you can watch it on Paramount Plus for free, or the Roku channel, and then you can also rent it from Redbox, whatever row 8 is, and then Prime Video and Vudu, you can rent it. So it looks like the only place you're going to get it for quote unquote free is if you already have Paramount Plus and or the Roku channel.
I still have Paramount Plus because I tried to cancel it and they gave it to me for free for 2 months.
Oh, there you go. That's right. And our listeners should have Paramount Plus because
yes,
Yellowjackets.
Unless they canceled it after Yellowjackets. Right. But I will say that when I tried to do that, they offered me 2 months free, which I took them up on, and then I will cancel it.
There you go. Which will be a little bit of enough time to watch Scream. Anyway, listeners.
Exactly.
So that's that. Since we last talked, we've had a couple of new 5-star reviews.
Ooh.
And so we'll go out
exciting.
on those as we've been doing lately. Thank you really so much, listeners, for hanging out with us for our first season. And if you're back now, thank you so much for wanting to hang out with us while we're not talking about Yellowjackets. Feel free to keep leaving reviews, especially in the off season, if you like this conversation, letting people know that we're still talking about stuff that's fun and hopefully relevant. And and
maybe, we can sneakily get more people into Yellowjackets by dragging them in with conversations about movies that they're interested in, and then sort of evangelizing about Yellowjackets.
That's really the real plan. If you are somebody who's listening to this because you have like an alert on your phone for Heather's podcast, go back and watch Yellowjackets.
If that's true, we should be best friends because you are my type of person.
Binge the first 2 seasons of Yellowjackets because it's so good. But so we have a review from Citizen Jess.
Amazing.
Fantastic. Smart and fun. I'm so happy I found this podcast via Reddit. That's all you, Jodie.
Hell yeah.
These two are so easy to listen to while having great insights and fun asides without getting too carried away, because we edit out all of the getting too carried away.
Andrea's a good editor is why that's not the case.
I appreciate that they take the time to digest each episode so they can have a thoughtful conversation rather than rushing out some quippy hot takes. Yeah.
Oh, that's nice.
I really love to hear that because I think we do publish a little later than a lot of other shows, but it's intentional.
Well, it takes me time to write out 15 pages of notes.
Also that. I look forward to seeing what conversations come out in the off season. So
yay, hope you're still here.
Listening, thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Hope you like Heathers.
And then one more. Great perspectives. This is from J Paddig 66. I listened to 12ish with like 5 question marks Yellowjackets podcast, and these gals have one of the best. Great breakdown and fun theorizing. Thank you so much.
I hope you're okay.
Yeah, 12ish is so many, but as someone who is never not listening to a podcast, I absolutely understand. I'm
all the time.
I love that we're in your rotation. Thank you so much.
That's nice.
Find us at Watchers Pod NJ on Twitter and Instagram. Jodie, where can they find you?
They can find me on Instagram at Jodie_Mim, JODIE_MIM. It's just my art account, so if you're not interested in art, then don't bother. But if you are, come see me.
You should be interested in Jodie's art. Jodie's art is fantastic. And if you're interested in my dog Pacey, you can find me at AQ Andrea Q.
As you should be, because Pacey is awesome.
He's pretty much all I talk about other than podcasts.
So that's it. Hopefully we will see you next week for Scream. And each week we will just let you know what the next movie is, and hopefully you can join us for the conversation.
Goodbye.
Goodbye.